My name is Sienna. I am 34 years old, and I never expected my own mother to sell my sanctuary to fund a lifestyle of fake luxury. They thought they had outsmarted the black sheep of the family. They thought they could strip away my legacy while I was busy building my career. Last weekend, I drove down to the Hamptons to clear my head at the oceanfront estate my grandparents left exclusively to me. Instead of the familiar sound of seagulls and crashing waves, I was greeted by the screech of a power drill and a massive wooden sign stabbed into my front lawn. The sign read "Sold" in bold red letters. As I stood there holding the key that no longer fit the front door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text message from my brother-in-law, Andre. He is a polished real estate executive who always wears suits that cost more than my first car. The text read, "Thanks for the early wedding gift, Sienna. The house closed at a great price. Lexi is thrilled. I did not scream, I did not cry. I simply smiled because they had no idea they had just stolen a house from a woman who specializes in hunting down financial predators." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with entitled family members who cross the ultimate boundary. Growing up in an affluent neighborhood in Manhattan taught me early on that appearances were everything to my mother. Our pristine penthouse was a stage, and we were merely her actors. My younger sister Lexi was always the star of the show. She was the golden child who could do no wrong. Lexi is now 28 and spends her days posing for social media pretending to live a billionaire lifestyle she cannot actually afford. I was the opposite. I was quiet and calculating and preferred ledgers over luxury brands. That made me a massive disappointment to Beatrice. When my grandparents passed away, they left their beloved Hamptons estate to me. It was a sprawling property with weathered cedar shingles and a wraparound porch that smelled of salt and pine. My grandparents knew exactly who Beatrice was. They knew she would eventually try to liquidate every asset in sight to keep up her high society charade. That is why they left the property entirely in my name. For years, she played the role of the grieving daughter, claiming she needed access to the house for emotional closure. I gave her a spare key out of pity. I never imagined she would use that key to stage a fraudulent sale with Andre acting as the shady broker. Standing on the manicured grass of my stolen property, I watched a team of contractors carrying boxes into my living room. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe evenly. I approached the lead contractor who was busy checking a clipboard. I asked him who authorized the lock change. He looked at me with bored indifference and said the new owners wanted immediate access after the closing. He told me the broker Andre handled the paperwork and handed over the keys yesterday morning. The audacity was suffocating. Andre and Lexi had literally just gotten married 3 months ago. Their wedding was a spectacular display of wealth that I now realized was entirely funded by the stolen equity of my inheritance. I saw Andre's boutique real estate firm stamped at the bottom of the sold sign. He listed my property, handled the escrow, and pocketed a massive commission while smiling in my face at family dinners. They assumed I was just a naive corporate drone who would eventually back down to avoid a public scandal. They assumed I would let them keep the money to preserve the family peace. Family peace is the exact weapon toxic people use to keep their victims silent. But I am not a victim. I walked to my car and pulled out my laptop. As a forensic accountant, I deal in hard data, not emotions. My job is to track down hidden offshore accounts, uncover corporate embezzlement, and dismantle financial fraud networks. Andre thought his expensive suits made him invincible. He did not realize he had just handed a loaded gun to a sniper. I logged into my secure database and pulled the public property records. Within 5 minutes, I found the forged signatures. Beatrice had brazenly signed my name as the seller, while Andre notarized the documents himself. I started the engine. Beatrice was hosting a lavish celebration dinner that very evening to toast Lexi and Andre's new penthouse. It was time to crash the party. As I navigated the heavy evening traffic back toward the city, my mind drifted to the very reason I chose my profession. My obsession with financial security did not come from a desire to be rich. It came from a desperate need to protect myself from my own blood. I was exactly 17 years old when I learned my first lesson in corporate fraud, courtesy of my mother. I had just come home from a grueling part-time job when I opened a bank statement meant for my college fund. The balance was zero. Beatrice had forged my signature to drain my entire tuition savings. When I confronted her, she did not apologize. She simply rolled her eyes and said Lexi needed a designer wardrobe for her upcoming pageant, and that family shares everything. She called me selfish for even asking about the money. That was the exact moment I realized my mother was not a protector. She was a financial predator. I did not cry or throw a tantrum. Instead, I quietly took the forged bank documents straight to my grandparents. My grandfather was a shrewd businessman who saw right through Beatrice's polished facade. He was deeply appalled and frankly embarrassed by his own daughter's greed. He knew that the moment he and my grandmother passed away, Beatrice would stop at nothing to strip me of everything they intended to leave me. So the very next morning, my grandfather took me to his estate lawyer in downtown Manhattan. We spent hours in that mahogany boardroom, restructuring my entire future. My grandparents placed the Hamptons estate and a cash portfolio totaling $4 million into an ironclad private trust. It was not a standard inheritance account that could be easily contested in probate court. It was an impenetrable legal fortress. The terms were brutally clear. No asset could be liquidated, sold, or transferred without my physical presence and a verified signature authenticated by the trust executor. Beatrice had absolutely no idea this trust existed. For the past 17 years, she operated under the delusion that she was listed as the executor of the estate, simply waiting for the right legal loophole to claim what she believed was rightfully hers. She thought she was playing chess, but she was not even on the board. What Beatrice and Andre had just done by faking the sale of the Hamptons house was not just a greedy family betrayal. It was a textbook case of federal wire fraud and illegal conveyance. They had forged closing documents on a property that was legally untouchable by anyone but me. They thought they had secured a massive payday, but all they had actually done was sign their own arrest warrants. My phone lit up on the dashboard, breaking my concentration. It was a forwarded digital invitation from a cousin who always enjoyed stirring up family drama. The screen glowed with pretentious gold foil lettering. It was an invitation to an intimate celebration dinner hosted by Beatrice to toast Lexi and Andre's stunning new penthouse. The venue was an ultra-exclusive restaurant on the Upper East Side where reservations take months to secure and the menu has no prices. Naturally, I was not on the guest list. Beatrice only invited people who served a purpose. She wanted an audience of wealthy socialites and gullible relatives to applaud her incredible generosity and success as a matriarch. She wanted to bask in the glory of providing her golden child with the ultimate Manhattan lifestyle. I could already imagine her holding court at the head of the table, sipping vintage champagne and telling everyone that I was simply too busy crunching numbers at my boring corporate job to join the family festivities. She thrived on controlling the narrative. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. For years I had maintained a rigid boundary of silence. I let them live in their delusion because exposing them meant dragging myself through the mud of their toxic drama. But selling my sanctuary to fund a fraudulent lifestyle was the point of no return. I pulled up to the valet stand outside the glowing glass facade of the restaurant. I handed the attendant the keys to my car and stepped out into the crisp evening air. I took a moment to smooth the lapels of my tailored charcoal suit. I did not wear the flashy designer labels that Lexi flaunted, but the sharp cut of my clothes commanded undeniable authority. I was not the quiet teenager crying over a stolen college fund anymore. I was a seasoned forensic investigator who tore apart corrupt executives for a living. I pushed open the heavy brass doors of the restaurant and walked inside. I was about to walk into a room full of people who thought I was a helpless victim. They had no idea they were about to have dinner with their absolute worst nightmare. The maitre d' tried to stop me as I bypassed the host stand, but my confident stride and sharp charcoal suit made him hesitate just long enough for me to reach the private dining wing. I knew exactly which room Beatrice had booked. The Bordeaux room was her favorite spot to play pretending billionaire. I pushed open the heavy oak door without knocking. Inside the room smelled of truffles and expensive perfume. 10 people were seated around a long mahogany table, decorated with white orchids. My mother sat at the head of the table, holding a crystal flute of champagne. Lexi and Andre sat to her right, looking like a picture-perfect couple straight out of a luxury magazine. Lexi was draped in a silk designer gown that probably cost more than my first year of college tuition. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses abruptly died the second I stepped over the threshold. The fake smiles instantly melted off their faces. For a fraction of a second I saw genuine panic flash in Andre's eyes. He knew what he had done, and he knew I was not the type of person to drop by just to give my regards. But my mother was a seasoned actress. She never let a crisis ruin a good photo opportunity. A waiter carrying a tray of caviar appetizers happened to walk in right behind me. Beatrice immediately snapped her mask back into place, her face stretched into a bright, overly enthusiastic smile. "Sienna, darling," she cooed loudly, ensuring the waitstaff could hear every word. "You made it after all. We were just telling everyone how incredibly busy you are crunching numbers at your little corporate job. I am so glad you could tear yourself away from your spreadsheets to celebrate your sister's massive milestone. Come sit down. Bring my eldest daughter a chair, please." I did not break eye contact with her as the waiter scurried to bring an extra chair to the far end of the table. I sat down slowly, placing my leather briefcase on the floor next to my feet. I did not say a word. I just let the awkward silence stretch over the room like a heavy blanket. Lexi leaned forward, resting her diamond-ringed hand on Andre's arm. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure pity. She let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Honestly, Sienna, you could have at least changed out of your work uniform. We are celebrating a huge step up for the family tonight. Andre just closed the deal on our dream penthouse overlooking Central Park. It has floor-to-ceiling windows and a private rooftop terrace." She took a sip of her champagne and smiled maliciously. "It is just so wonderful that the family money is finally being put to good use instead of sitting around rotting in that dusty old beach house." "Right, Mom." Beatrice beamed with pride and patted Lex's hand. "Exactly, sweetie. Generational wealth is meant to help the younger generation build their futures. Family takes care of family." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air. Generational wealth. She was talking about my house. She was openly bragging to her friends and extended relatives about funding her golden child's luxury lifestyle, using an asset she had absolutely no legal right to touch. Andre shifted uncomfortably in his custom-tailored suit. He cleared his throat, trying to project the image of a successful businessman who was above petty sibling rivalry. "Now, Lexi, let us be humble," Andre said, smoothing his expensive silk tie. "Sienna works hard in her own way. We are just blessed that the market was in our favor, and we could liquidate an underutilized asset to diversify our real estate portfolio. It was a smart move for everyone." I stared at Andre. Liquidate an underutilized asset. He spoke with such clinical precision, completely ignoring the fact that he had personally forged federal documents to make that liquidation happen. They really believed they had gotten away with it. They thought because the money was already transferred and the keys were handed over, I was powerless to reverse it. They expected me to throw a fit and scream at them in front of the guests, which would only prove my mother's narrative that I was unstable and jealous of my sister. But I did not scream. I calmly picked up my water glass and took a sip. I looked at Lexi and smiled a cold, hollow smile. "I am thrilled for you, Lexi," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "A penthouse overlooking Central Park sounds very expensive to maintain. I hope your new lifestyle does not come with any hidden costs." Lexi rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed that she had not gotten a rise out of me. She turned back to her friends to continue bragging about her interior designer. That was when Beatrice decided it was time to put me firmly in my place. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a crisp white envelope. She tapped it against the mahogany table, her eyes locking onto mine with a predatory gleam. She was about to make a massive mistake. Beatrice slid the crisp white envelope across the polished mahogany table. It glided past the silver centerpieces and stopped right next to my water glass. The room fell so quiet, I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. I looked down at the envelope and then back up at my mother. Her predatory gleam had softened into a mask of maternal concern, specifically tailored for her wealthy audience. "Go ahead and open it, Sienna," she urged, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I wanted to handle this privately, but since you decided to drop in unannounced, I suppose there is no time like the present. We believe in transparency in this family." I picked up the envelope. The paper was heavy and expensive. I slid my thumb under the flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was an itemized invoice printed on Beatrice's personal letterhead. The total at the bottom was bolded and underlined: $50,000. I read the line items in silence. There were charges for retroactive property management fees, emotional labor compensation for dealing with my grandparents' estate, and estimated property taxes she claimed to have paid on my behalf over the last decade. It was a masterpiece of fiction. I looked up. "What exactly is this, Beatrice?" She sighed dramatically, placing a hand over her heart. "It is a back pay caretaking fee, darling. For years you lived in that massive Hamptons house, completely rent-free while you built your little career. I managed the emotional burden of the estate. I kept the family peace. I absorbed the stress that should have been yours. Since you are so hyper-focused on numbers, I thought it was only fair to calculate what you owe me for my services." Lexi chimed in, nodding vigorously. "Honestly, Sienna, 50,000 is a bargain. Mom could have charged you standard market rates for property management. You should be thanking her. Plus, you are single. You do not have children or a husband to support. You should be happy you donated the house to fund my penthouse. It is going to help my brand so much, and Andre needs a prestigious address for his real estate clients. It is an investment in the family." I stared at my sister. The word donated echoed in my mind. They had genuinely convinced themselves that forging federal documents and liquidating my private trust was simply a forced charitable donation to the Lexi Fund. The guests around the table shifted uncomfortably. A few of Beatrice's friends nodded in agreement, whispering about how hard it is to manage ungrateful adult children. I looked back down at the invoice. My eyes scanned the absurd charges. I read one aloud. "Lawn maintenance for the years 2015 through 2018, $5,000. I placed the paper flat on the table. Beatrice the Hamptons property has a stone driveway and a natural sand dune backyard. There is no lawn. Beatrice's face flashed red for a fraction of a second before she recovered. "It is an estimated general maintenance fee, Sienna. Stop deflecting. The point is, you owe this family for everything we have given you. We facilitated the sale of a property you were neglecting. We put the money to work. You should be writing me a check right now to clear your conscience." Andre leaned in, resting his elbows on the table. "Sienna, let us look at this logically. The 50,000 is just a rebalancing of family assets. You walked away with a free education and a great job. Lexi and I are building a legacy. The closing on the Hamptons house covered the penthouse down payment, but there are still closing costs and renovation fees we need to handle. If you just pay the invoice, we can put all this sibling rivalry behind us. We can move forward as a united front." He was trying to sound like a mediator, but I could hear the slight tremor of desperation in his voice. Andre did not just want $50,000 to punish me. He needed that cash to plug a hole in his failing finances. The house sale had not been enough to cover his hidden debts. I did not reach for my checkbook. I did not raise my voice to defend myself. I sat perfectly still, analyzing the exact legal definition of the document sitting in front of me. Beatrice thought she was humiliating me in front of her high society friends. She thought she was establishing dominance. What she had actually done was hand a forensic accountant written documented proof of attempted extortion to accompany her wire fraud. I slowly folded the invoice and slipped it into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. I looked at Beatrice with an expression of absolute ice. "I am not going to pay this invoice," I said softly, "but I will definitely be keeping it for my records." Beatrice's smug smile faltered. "Give that back to me right now," she snapped, her maternal mask slipping completely. I did not hand the envelope back. I simply slipped it deeper into my jacket pocket and kept my eyes fixed on her. Beatrice half rose from her chair, her perfectly manicured fingers curling into claws against the white tablecloth. Before she could make a scene that would irreparably damage her high society reputation, Andre quickly stood up. He placed a heavy hand on Beatrice's shoulder, gently forcing her back into her seat. He shot her a warning look that clearly said, "Let me handle this." Andre buttoned his custom-tailored suit jacket and flashed me his signature $1 million smile. It was the same smile he used on billboard advertisements across the city. "Sienna, let us all take a deep breath," he said, his voice smooth and heavily modulated. "There is no need for hostility here. We are family, and family looks out for each other. I know seeing the house sold was a shock, but you have to look at the bigger picture. The luxury real estate market is incredibly volatile right now. We are looking at an impending correction. Keeping a massive aging oceanfront property like that is financial suicide for a single woman on a corporate salary. Do you have any idea what the carrying costs on a property like that actually are, Sienna? The property taxes, the saltwater corrosion maintenance, the insurance premiums. It is an absolute money pit." He paced slowly behind Lexi's chair, projecting the aura of a seasoned expert. "You are an accountant. You should understand depreciation better than anyone. We did not sell your house to hurt you. We sold it to save you from a catastrophic financial burden. The market was simply too good to pass up, and we had an all-cash buyer ready to close in 10 days. It was a once-in-a-lifetime deal, and I had to move fast to secure it for the family. You would have been bankrupted by that house within 5 years. I did you a massive favor." I listened to his polished monologue without interrupting. He sounded incredibly convincing to the untrained ear. The other guests at the table were nodding along, entirely hypnotized by his confident jargon. But I was not an untrained ear. I was a forensic auditor. I did not hear a concerned brother-in-law trying to protect my financial future. I heard a desperate man reciting a rehearsed pitch to justify grand larceny. I looked closely at Andre. I noticed the subtle details he tried to hide. The luxury watch on his wrist was a newer model, but the gold plating on the clasp was heavily scuffed, indicating it was bought second-hand. His custom suit fit perfectly, but it was a style from 3 seasons ago. And then the final puzzle piece clicked perfectly into place. He mentioned an all-cash buyer and a 10-day closing. You cannot close a multi-million-dollar estate in 10 days without an aggressively motivated broker pushing the paperwork through the county clerk and bypassing standard escrow holds. He was not just helping my mother liquidate an asset, he was the listing agent. In the state of New York, the standard luxury real estate commission is 6%. If they sold the Hamptons estate for its baseline market value of $4 million, Andre had just pocketed a $240,000 commission fee. That was the real motive all along. Lexi getting a penthouse was just the cover story to make the crime sound like an act of family loyalty. The truth was that Andre needed a massive injection of liquid cash to float his failing brokerage, and Beatrice needed capital to maintain her wealthy facade. They had colluded to steal my property so they could both take a massive cut of the equity. It was a brilliant scam if the victim was anyone else, but they had chosen the absolute worst target. Andre leaned forward, resting his hands flat on the table, looking at me with total mock sincerity. "The money from the sale has already been routed to a secure trust account managed by your mother. It is completely safe. It is growing. And it helped Lexi and me secure a solid foundation for our future children. You should be proud to be part of that legacy. You just need to sign a few retroactive disclosure forms to finalize the title transfer, and we can all move on." Retroactive disclosure forms. The words hung in the cold air. He was talking about a quitclaim deed. He needed me to sign away my rights after the fact because the title company would eventually realize the initial signature was a forgery. He was actively trying to manipulate me into permanently legalizing his own financial crime. I looked at Andre as the silence stretched across the dining room. He was waiting for me to break down. He was waiting for me to yell or throw my glass of water so he could play the victim. That is how manipulators operate. They push you to the edge of your sanity and then point a finger at your reaction to avoid taking accountability for their actions. I did not give him the satisfaction. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands neatly on my lap. I let him sweat under my gaze for a few seconds longer. The confidence in his posture began to crack just a fraction. He shifted his weight and tugged nervously at the collar of his expensive silk tie. The heavy silence was suffocating him. "Tell me something, Andre," I said, keeping my tone perfectly conversational and light. "When you pushed those closing documents through the county clerk last week, how exactly did you manage to bypass the IRS escrow requirements for a contested title? Did you falsify the schedule? K-1 forms yourself? Or did you find a desperate notary willing to risk federal prison for a small cut of your massive commission check?" The effect of my words was instantaneous and absolutely devastating. All the blood drained from Andre's face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped inside a custom suit. His confident million-dollar smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He knew exactly what those specific terms meant. He knew that I understood the exact mechanics of his crime. Beatrice frowned deeply, clearly confused by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. She did not understand the dense legal terminology, but she recognized the absolute terror spreading across her son-in-law's face. Lexi looked back and forth between us, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the heavy mahogany table. "What on earth are you talking about?" Sienna Beatrice snapped, trying desperately to regain control of the room and the narrative. "Do not try to confuse us with your boring accounting jargon. We are talking about family business here. You need to sign those retroactive disclosure forms tonight so we can finalize the paperwork and move on. It is just a simple legal formality to keep the family unified." I kept my eyes locked entirely on Andre, who was now visibly trembling under the warm restaurant lights. "It is not a simple formality." "Beatrice," I replied softly, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet room. "It is an admission of guilt. If I sign a quitclaim deed after the fact, I become legally complicit in a massive case of wire fraud. You see, my grandfather did not just leave me a beautiful oceanfront house. He left me a legal fortress. The title of that property is locked tightly inside a private trust that requires my physical presence and a verified, authenticated signature to alter. The signature you submitted to the title company was a blatant forgery." I paused deliberately, letting the heavy weight of the word forgery settle over the dinner guests. The wealthy socialites sitting around the table suddenly looked incredibly uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. No one in high society wanted to be associated with a federal crime. I watched Andre's chest heave as he struggled to breathe normally. He had gambled his entire career and freedom on the arrogant assumption that I was ignorant and easily intimidated. He never expected me to forensically audit his crime scene before the dessert course was even served. I slowly stood up from my chair and picked up my leather briefcase from the floor. I reached into my suit pocket, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and dropped it onto the white tablecloth right next to my untouched glass of water. "That is to cover my tap water," I said smoothly. "I would hate for you to add it to my $50,000 caretaking invoice." Beatrice stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor. "Sienna, you sit back down right now," she hissed, her voice thick with panic and rage. "You do not walk away from me. We are not finished here. You owe this family your cooperation." I looked at my mother one last time, feeling nothing but cold resolve. "Oh, we are absolutely finished, Beatrice," I said. "Enjoy your celebration dinner tonight. Enjoy the beautiful new penthouse Lexi. Because the federal government is incredibly thorough when they audit fraudulent luxury real estate transactions." I turned my back on them and confidently walked out of the Bordeaux room. I did not look back, but I could hear the immediate eruption of panicked whispers and Andre's frantic voice trying to calm my mother down. The first warning shot had been fired. The cool air of Manhattan felt refreshing against my face as I stepped out of the restaurant. I directed my driver straight to the financial district. It was past 9 in the evening when I swiped my keycard at the heavy glass doors of my firm. The office was mostly empty, save for a few junior analysts burning the midnight oil. I walked straight to my corner office, locked the door behind me, and powered on my dual monitors. I was not going to wait until morning to dismantle my family. I was going to map out their entire criminal enterprise tonight. I poured myself a black coffee and sat down. As a senior forensic accountant, I had security clearances and access to financial databases that the average citizen did not even know existed. I logged into our proprietary tracking software and tapped into the federal wire transfer logs. I started with the public sale record of the Hamptons estate. The property closed for $4.2 million. From there, it was just a matter of following the digital breadcrumbs. Numbers never lie, and they certainly do not keep family secrets. Within 20 minutes, I found the primary escrow account used for the closing. It was registered under a shell company affiliated with Andres Real Estate Brokerage. I watched the money splinter off into different directions like a shattered mirror. A massive cut of $250,000 was routed directly into Andres' personal offshore checking account. He had listed it as a consulting fee to evade standard commission tax laws. Another chunk of $500,000 went straight to a luxury car dealership and a high-end interior design firm to furnish Lexi's new penthouse. The remaining $3.4 million was parked in a newly established wealth management account under Beatrice's name. Seeing the money flow was satisfying, but it did not answer my biggest question. How did they legally bypass the private trust my grandfather set up? That trust was specifically designed to be bulletproof. A simple forged signature on a quitclaim deed would have been flagged immediately by any competent title insurance company. Andre was greedy, but he was not stupid enough to rely on a single forged signature for a multi-million-dollar transaction. They had to have presented a secondary legal document to override the trust entirely. I opened a new encrypted tab and accessed the New York County Clerk probate records. I typed in my grandfather's social security number and hit enter. The screen loaded for a few agonizing seconds before a PDF document appeared. My eyes scanned the title of the file and my blood turned to ice. It was a last will and testament dated just 2 months before my grandfather passed away. I clicked open the file and started reading. It was a complete fabrication. The forged document claimed that my grandfather had revoked all previous trusts and named Beatrice as the sole executor and primary beneficiary of his entire estate. They had completely written me out of the family history. Beatrice had meticulously forged my grandfather's handwriting on a fake will. She even went as far as hiring a corrupt notary public to stamp the document, giving it the illusion of federal legitimacy. She submitted this fake will to the county court, effectively stealing my inheritance right under the nose of the legal system. The sheer audacity of the crime took my breath away. Beatrice did not just commit real estate fraud. She committed perjury, forgery, and grand larceny against the federal government. She had manipulated the probate court to legally erase my ownership of the Hamptons estate so Andre could sell it with a clean title. They had orchestrated a highly sophisticated financial crime syndicate right from their living room. I printed the forged will and laid it on my desk next to the actual trust documents my grandfather had legally filed 17 years ago. Looking at the two signatures side by side, the forgery was painfully obvious to a trained eye. My grandfather's real signature was sharp and angled. The fake signature was too perfectly looped and lacked the natural tremor of an elderly man. Beatrice had tried too hard to make it look flawless. I leaned back in my leather chair and took a long sip of my coffee. They thought they had committed the perfect financial crime without leaving any trace. They assumed I would simply accept the massive loss of the house and move on. They had no idea I was already compiling a federal dossier that would completely obliterate their lives forever. I reached for my phone and dialed the State Real Estate Commission. It was finally time to freeze their assets and build my wall of evidence. I placed my phone back on the desk after leaving a detailed urgent voicemail for the lead investigator at the State Real Estate Commission. I knew my credentials would flag the message for priority review by morning. Freezing the accounts was step one. But to truly dismantle their operation, I needed to understand the desperation that drove them to commit such a reckless crime. Happy, wealthy people do not forge federal documents to steal from their own family. Only terrified, desperate people do that. I turned my attention back to my dual monitors and opened a new search window. It was time to look into the man who orchestrated this entire scheme. I typed Andre's full legal name and his brokerage license number into my financial tracking software. On social media, Andre projected the perfect image of a self-made titan of industry. His accounts were flooded with photos of him shaking hands in expensive tailored suits, posing next to exotic sports cars, and toasting champagne on private jets. Lexus influencer brand was entirely built on this aesthetic of limitless wealth. But as the data began populating across my screens, the polished illusion completely shattered. I pulled his corporate tax filings and personal credit reports. The numbers painted a horrifying picture of financial ruin. Andre's boutique real estate firm was nothing more than a hollow shell company. 2 years ago, he had taken out massive high-interest loans from private lenders to invest heavily in commercial retail spaces. He gambled on a market boom that never happened. The properties sat vacant, the commercial real estate market plummeted, and the private lenders came knocking for their money. Andre was not a successful executive. He was currently sitting on over $5 million of toxic debt. I dug deeper into their personal spending. The lavish wedding they hosted 3 months ago was not paid for with savings. Andre had fraudulently opened 6 different corporate credit cards using his shell company credentials and maxed them all out to pay the wedding vendors. Lexus' endless supply of designer handbags, luxury vacations, and 5-star dinners were entirely funded through aggressive credit card kiting. They were taking out new lines of credit simply to pay the minimum balances on the old ones. It was a classic house of cards teetering on the edge of total collapse. The new penthouse overlooking Central Park was the final piece of the puzzle. Lexi claimed they bought it, but the property records showed they were only renting it. And even worse, they had forged their income verification documents just to pass the landlord background check. They were living month to month, dodging collection agencies while pretending to be Manhattan elite. The truth hit me with absolute clarity. The sale of my Hamptons estate was never about helping the family diversify assets or setting up a nest egg for Lexi. It was a desperate, frantic bailout. Andre's private lenders were closing in. If he defaulted on those massive commercial loans, the lenders would have forced his firm into bankruptcy and ordered a forensic audit of his books. That audit would have immediately exposed his credit card fraud and sent him straight to federal prison. He needed a massive injection of liquid cash immediately, just to keep the creditors at bay. Beatrice, desperate to protect her golden child's flawless public image, willingly sacrificed my inheritance to save her son-in-law from a criminal indictment. They stole my $4 million estate to pay off bad debts and fund a fake lifestyle. I sat back in my chair staring at the glowing red numbers on my monitors. The sheer scale of their delusion was staggering. They had convinced themselves that their image was worth destroying my future. They thought they had successfully plugged the hole in their sinking ship. But by forging my grandfather's will and selling a property tied to a private trust, they had just traded a state-level financial crisis for a federal felony. I exported every single document loan agreement and forged tax return into a secure encrypted file. I printed physical copies of everything and organized them neatly into a thick manila folder. The clock on my computer screen read 2 in the morning. My eyes were heavy, but my mind was racing with absolute clarity. I had all the evidence I needed to destroy Andre's career and send him to prison. But Andre was just a symptom of the disease. The true architect of my pain was the woman who gave birth to me. I packed the folder into my leather briefcase and locked my office door. I called a car to take me straight to the Upper East Side. It was time to visit my mother. The black town car pulled up to the gilded awning of my mother's Upper East Side building. The night doorman recognized me and nodded, letting me straight through to the private elevator. I pressed the button for the penthouse level. The doors slid open directly into Beatrice's grand foyer. It was completely silent save for the soft ticking of a vintage grandfather clock. I walked past the marble columns and found her in the main living room. She was sitting in a plush velvet armchair, still wearing her designer dinner dress, sipping a glass of wine and staring out at the city skyline. She did not look surprised to see me. In fact, she looked profoundly annoyed. "You have incredible nerve showing up here at 2 in the morning, Sienna," she said without turning around. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I walked to the glass coffee table, unclasped my briefcase, and pulled out the manila folder. I dropped it onto the glass right next to her wineglass. I pulled out the printed copy of the forged will and placed it on top of the pile. "I know exactly what you and Andre did," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I know all about the shell company, the offshore accounts, the maxed-out credit cards, and the massive commercial debt. And I know that forging a federal document to bypass an ironclad private trust is not just greedy, but phenomenally stupid." Beatrice finally turned her head to look at me. She did not flinch. She did not burst into tears or beg for forgiveness. She calmly picked up the forged will, glanced at the signature she had meticulously crafted, and then tossed the paper back onto the table like it was a piece of junk mail. She took another slow sip of her wine and let out a long, exasperated sigh. "You were always so painfully dramatic, Sienna," she sneered. "You were always the difficult child. You obsessed over rules and numbers while Lexi was the one who actually understood the true meaning of family." Beatrice stood up and began pacing the luxurious room, her voice dripping with toxic venom. She told me I had never deserved that Hamptons house. She claimed my grandparents only left it to me to spite her because they never respected her ambition. She said Lexi was the heart of the family. Lexi was the golden child who brought joy and prestige to our name, while I was just a cold, calculating machine who embarrassed her at social events. She yelled that it was a mother's job to protect her vulnerable children. She insisted Lexi needed protection from Andre's temporary financial setbacks. She completely justified her felony by claiming she was simply reallocating idle resources to save the family image from public ruin. She looked me dead in the eye and said my entire existence had been a burden, and I owed them this financial bailout as repayment for raising me. I asked her if she really believed her own twisted lies. I asked her if protecting a fake wealthy image was worth risking a lengthy term in federal prison. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, cold sound that echoed loudly in the cavernous room. She walked over to her mahogany writing desk and turned back to face me. "You sound exactly like your father, right before I ruined him," she said casually. My blood ran entirely cold. My father had lost absolutely everything in a brutal divorce settlement when I was just a child. He was left entirely bankrupt, forced to move across the country in utter disgrace. Beatrice smiled proudly, adjusting her diamond necklace. She admitted right then and there that she had forged his financial disclosures during the divorce proceedings. She had systematically hidden millions of dollars in offshore accounts to ensure he walked away with absolutely nothing. She bragged about how incredibly easy it was to manipulate the legal system when you have the right connections, a confident smile, and a ruthless mindset. She told me she had utterly destroyed a much smarter man than me, and she would not hesitate to destroy my career and reputation if I tried to interfere with her plans now. "Leave the folder on the table, go back to your empty little apartment and forget this ever happened," she commanded, pointing a manicured finger at the door. "If you breathe a word of this to anyone, I will make your life a living hell, Sienna." She turned her back on me and looked out the massive window again, dismissing me completely, like I was a disobedient servant. I did not argue with her. I did not scream or throw things. I calmly picked up my folder, placed it back inside my briefcase, and clicked the metal locks shut. I had gathered absolutely everything I needed. She genuinely thought her confession was a display of ultimate power and dominance. She did not realize she had just confessed to multiple federal crimes, including perjury and historical fraud, while I had my phone actively recording the entire conversation from inside my suit pocket. I walked out of the apartment, leaving her alone in her high tower. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing the fate of my family. I rode the elevator down to the lobby in total silence, pulling my phone from my pocket to verify the audio file. The recording was crystal clear. Beatrice had delivered a flawless, unprompted confession to multiple federal crimes. I forwarded the encrypted file to 3 separate secure cloud servers and emailed a copy directly to my personal attorney. I went back to my apartment and slept for 4 hours. When I woke up the next morning, I fully expected a frantic phone call from Andre begging me to reconsider. Instead, I was served with legal papers before I even finished my morning coffee. A courier knocked on my door at 7:30 sharp, handing me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a formal notice of a civil lawsuit and an emergency petition for a restraining order. Beatrice and Lexi had not wasted a single second. Knowing I had the evidence to destroy them, they launched a preemptive strike designed to entirely discredit my character. They filed a frivolous harassment lawsuit, claiming I had trespassed at their private dinner and then violently threatened my mother in her own home later that night. The affidavit was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Beatrice claimed I had a long documented history of severe mental instability and financial jealousy. She swore under oath that I was aggressively trying to extort them for money to fund my own failing career. It was the classic manipulator playbook. When toxic people realize they can no longer control you, they immediately pivot to controlling how other people see you. They needed the courts and the public to believe I was a dangerous, unhinged stalker, so that when I finally presented my evidence, it would look like the fabricated revenge plot of a crazy woman. But the legal harassment was only the first phase of their attack. As I stood in my kitchen reading the absurd court filings, my phone began buzzing endlessly with notifications. My firm's junior partner called me frantically. He told me our corporate servers were being flooded with hostile traffic. I opened my laptop and went straight to Lex's social media profiles. She had posted a 10-minute highly edited crying video to her 2 million followers. She sat on the floor of her fraudulently rented penthouse wearing no makeup and an oversized sweater, looking incredibly frail and terrified. She sobbed into the camera, telling her audience a fabricated story about her toxic, jealous older sister who was trying to ruin her marriage and destroy her life out of pure spite. She did not mention the Hamptons house or the wire fraud. She framed the entire situation as a tragic case of unprovoked sibling abuse. Lexi knew exactly what she was doing. She weaponized her massive following without ever explicitly naming me. She dropped just enough subtle hints about my location and profession that her rabid fan base found my corporate profile within minutes. They descended on my accounting firm like a swarm of locusts. Hundreds of fake one-star reviews flooded our public pages claiming I was a corrupt, unethical auditor who harassed innocent families. The firm's reception lines were jammed with angry callers demanding that I be fired immediately for domestic abuse. Lexi was using her internet mob to terrorize my employer, hoping the professional pressure would force me to drop the investigation and sign away my inheritance to save my job. She wanted me to feel as cornered and desperate as Andre was. She wanted me to panic and surrender to the overwhelming weight of public humiliation. They fundamentally misunderstood how a forensic accountant operates under pressure. I did not cry over the fake reviews. I did not log on to social media to defend myself in the comments section. I immediately called my managing partner and explained the exact nature of the situation. Because my firm specialized in uncovering massive corporate fraud, we were intimately familiar with retaliatory smear campaigns. My boss did not panic. He simply laughed, instructed our IT department to temporarily lock down our public directories, and told me to take as much paid leave as I needed to bury them. I printed out the entire thread of Lex's defamatory social media posts and added them to my growing dossier. Lexi thought she was winning a public relations war. She did not realize she was actively documenting a coordinated cyber harassment and defamation campaign that I would personally use to multiply her civil damages. I neatly stacked the lawsuit papers on my desk. They wanted a brutal legal battle to force me into a settlement. I was more than happy to oblige them right now. 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting in a sterile glass-walled conference room in downtown Manhattan for the mandatory mediation session. The legal system moves incredibly slow unless you have money, and Beatrice had drained Andre's credit cards to hire an aggressive defense attorney. Mr. Thorne built his lucrative career by intimidating opposing parties into quiet settlements. He sat across the long polished table wearing a bespoke suit and an arrogant smirk. Next to him sat my mother. She was dressed in soft conservative colors, holding a crumpled lace handkerchief. As soon as the neutral mediator entered the room, Beatrice immediately launched into an Oscar-worthy performance. She dabbed at her dry eyes and let out a shaky theatrical breath. She told the mediator how absolutely heartbreaking it was to sit across from her own flesh and blood in a legal setting. She painted a vivid, tragic picture of a mother desperately trying to save her eldest daughter from a severe psychological breakdown. She referenced the fake social media harassment campaign, claiming that my jealousy over Lex's happy marriage had finally pushed me over the edge. She spoke with such genuine-sounding sorrow that if I did not know she had recently forged federal documents to steal $4 million, I might have actually felt sorry for her. Mr. Thorne took over seamlessly, leaning forward and folding his hands on the table. He looked at me with a sickeningly patronizing expression. "Sienna, your mother loves you very much," he began, his voice dripping with fake empathy. "She does not want to see your professional career destroyed by these unfortunate public outbursts. She understands that the stress of your accounting job, combined with your long-standing sibling rivalry, has caused you to act irrationally. We are here today to offer you a graceful exit. We want to help you get the psychological help you clearly need without involving a messy public trial." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He slid them across the smooth table until they stopped right in front of me. I glanced down at the top page. It was a retroactive quitclaim deed. It was the exact same legal document Andre had begged me to sign at the celebration dinner. The document would legally transfer all my ownership rights of the Hamptons estate directly to Beatrice, backdating the transfer to a week before she fraudulently sold the property. It was the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card for their entire criminal enterprise. Mr. Thorne tapped the document with his expensive gold pen. "If you sign this deed right now, we will immediately drop the civil harassment lawsuit," he stated firmly. "We will issue a public statement clearing your name of the social media backlash. You can go back to your quiet life, and your mother will handle the family estate as she sees fit. However, if you refuse to cooperate, we will have no choice but to escalate this matter to protect the family." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for the threat. It did not take long. "Given your recent erratic behavior, your mother is fully prepared to file an emergency petition in probate court." Mr. Thorne continued, his tone dropping its friendly facade and turning sharp and cold. "We will formally request a psychological evaluation to have you declared legally incompetent to manage your own affairs. We will seek a full medical conservatorship. If the court grants it, your mother will be given total legal control over your finances, your medical decisions, and your career. Do not force us to take that step, Sienna. Sign the paperwork and let your family move on." The room fell completely silent. The mediator looked at me, expecting me to either burst into tears or angrily flip the table. They were threatening to strip away my basic human rights and lock me in a legal cage if I did not help them cover up their felony. I looked past Mr. Thorne and locked eyes with Andre, who was sitting silently at the far end of the table. He was sweating profusely. He knew this insane legal threat was their absolute last resort. They were bluffing with an empty hand, hoping my fear of public humiliation and forced medical evaluations would compel me to surrender my inheritance. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to feel utterly trapped by their expensive lawyer and their carefully crafted lies. I looked down at the quitclaim deed and then looked back up at my mother. Her lace handkerchief was resting on the table, and her eyes were hard and calculating. She thought she had me perfectly checkmated today. She had absolutely no idea I was about to completely flip the entire board. I looked at the retroactive quitclaim deed resting in front of me. It was a single piece of paper that represented their entire desperate delusion. They genuinely thought my biggest vulnerability was my reputation. I picked up the pen Mr. Thorne had offered me. Beatrice let out a small, relieved sigh, her shoulders visibly relaxing. Andre finally took a deep breath. I held the pen for a moment, inspecting the gold trim before I placed it down exactly where I found it. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick manila folder I had compiled the night before. I did not say a word about my sanity. I did not mention the social media harassment or defend my psychological state. I opened the folder and pulled out a stack of dense forensic financial reports. I slid the first document across the table directly to Mr. Thorne. It was not a legal argument. It was pure, indisputable math. "What you are holding, Mr. Thorne," I said, leaning back in my chair, "is a certified federal routing trace. It details exactly how $250,000 of equity from the sale of my private trust property was illegally transferred into an offshore shell account registered to your client, Andre." Mr. Thorne frowned, looking down at the document. His arrogant smirk instantly vanished. I slid a second document across the table. "That one is a credit analysis proving that your client Lexi used fraudulently obtained corporate credit cards to fund her wedding and her current lifestyle." And finally, I slid the thickest document forward. "That is a copy of the fake will your client Beatrice submitted to the county clerk. I have already confirmed with a forensic handwriting expert that the signature is a blatant forgery. I also have an audio recording of Beatrice confessing to this exact crime 2 nights ago." The color completely drained from Mr. Thorne's face. He was an aggressive lawyer, but he was not a fool. He specialized in civil intimidation, not defending federal felonies. He looked up at Beatrice with an expression of sheer, horrified realization. She had completely lied to him. She had hired him to bully a difficult daughter into a civil settlement, telling him they had a clean legal title. She had intentionally neglected to mention that the entire situation was built on top of massive wire fraud and perjury. Beatrice shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her theatrical sadness evaporating instantly. "Sienna, stop this nonsense," she hissed, grabbing the edge of the table. "You are making things up. Mr. Thorne, do not look at those papers. She is having an episode." Mr. Thorne ignored her completely. His eyes were scanning the dense financial data, and he knew immediately that the documents were perfectly legitimate. As a seasoned attorney, he knew exactly what happens when you knowingly try to enforce a contract tied to stolen assets. He was dangerously close to being implicated in their conspiracy just by being in the room. He slammed the folder shut and pushed it slightly away from him. Andre began to panic, his carefully crafted real estate persona shattering entirely. "You cannot use those," he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the folder. "That is illegally obtained financial data. You hacked my accounts." I laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "I am a certified forensic accountant, Andre. I used federal databases that I have legal clearance to access because I suspected a crime had been committed against my personal estate. The data is perfectly admissible, and right now it is sitting on the desks of 3 different federal agencies." Mr. Thorne cleared his throat loudly, desperately trying to regain control of a situation that had just spiraled into an absolute legal nightmare. "Okay, let us take a step back," he said, holding up his hands. "Clearly, there are some deep misunderstandings regarding the estate transfer. My clients are willing to make this right." He pulled out a calculator from his briefcase, his fingers flying over the keys. "If the issue is simply financial compensation, we can expedite a settlement today. My clients will agree to buy out your portion of the Hamptons property for $1.5 million. That is well above standard market depreciation. You sign the quitclaim deed, we transfer the funds by Friday, and this entire situation remains confidential. No one goes to court, no one gets audited." He was offering me a low-ball settlement to sweep a federal felony under the rug. He was trying to buy my silence to save his own clients from prison. I looked at the calculator screen displaying the settlement offer. I looked at Beatrice, who was nodding eagerly, silently begging me to take the money and let her keep her fake high society life. I reached out and pushed the calculator back toward Mr. Thorne. "I am not a disgruntled beneficiary looking for a quick payout. I stated clearly, locking eyes with the lawyer. I am the sole owner of a $4 million estate that was stolen through forgery. I will not accept 1.5 million. I will not accept 4 million. The only piece of paper I am signing today is my witness statement for the federal authorities. The only piece of paper I am signing today is my witness statement for the federal authorities. I stood up from the sleek conference table and picked up my leather briefcase. Mr. Thorne did not try to stop me. He was already packing his own bags, looking like a man who realized he had stepped on a live landmine. Beatrice sat frozen in her chair, her face entirely devoid of color, while Andre stared at the wall with a hollow, empty expression. I walked out of the mediation center, feeling a profound sense of clarity. They thought they could corner me in a room and bully me into submission, but they only handed me the perfect opportunity to see the whites of their eyes before I pulled the trigger. I did not go back to my apartment. I went straight to my corporate office. In the financial world, you do not need to physically touch someone to completely paralyze them. You just need to cut off their oxygen supply, and for people like Andre, oxygen is liquidity. I sat down at my desk and pulled up the secure digital portals for the State Real Estate Commission and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Because of my senior forensic credentials, my filings bypassed the standard automated queues and went directly to the emergency review boards. I spent the next 2 hours systematically uploading every piece of evidence I had gathered. I attached the forged will, the routing trace of the stolen equity, the fraudulent credit applications, and the audio recording of Beatrice's late-night confession. I filed a formal request for an immediate emergency injunction to freeze all assets associated with Andres' brokerage firm, citing severe flight risk and active federal wire fraud. The beauty of the American banking system is that when the federal government suspects massive real estate fraud, they do not wait for a court date to secure the stolen funds. They lock down everything immediately and ask questions later. I hit submit on the final form and leaned back in my chair. The digital trap was officially set. Now, it was just a matter of waiting for the jaws to snap shut. I did not have to wait long. Less than 48 hours later, the dominoes began to fall in spectacular fashion. I was sitting at a corner cafe near Wall Street, sipping an espresso, when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered it and heard the sound of ragged, heavy breathing on the other end. Sienna, what did you do? It was Andre. His smooth, confident executive voice was completely gone, replaced by the frantic, high-pitched tone of a trapped animal. I took a calm sip of my espresso. I am not sure what you mean, I replied casually. Do not play games with me, he screamed into the receiver. I just tried to pay the monthly premium on my commercial bridge loan, and my corporate accounts are locked. My personal checking is frozen. Even Lexus credit cards are declining. The bank manager just told me there is a federal hold on my entire portfolio pending an SEC investigation. They suspended my brokerage license, Sienna. You ruined me. I listened to his violent panic echoing through the phone speaker. He was standing in the middle of his empty shell company office watching his entire fake empire burn to the ground. Without access to those accounts, he could not pay his private lenders. Without his license, he could not legally close another real estate deal to bail himself out. The massive mountain of debt he had been hiding was about to crash down on him all at once. You ruined yourself, Andre. I said, my voice ice cold. You chose to forge federal documents. You chose to illegally sell a property tied to a private trust. You chose to use my inheritance to fund a fake luxury lifestyle for my sister. I did not force you to commit wire fraud. I just provided the math to the people whose job it is to put criminals in prison. He was hyperventilating now, the reality of his situation fully crashing over him. You have to undo this, he begged, his voice cracking. Sienna, please. The private lenders are going to destroy me. Lexi is crying. We have zero cash. We cannot even buy groceries. You have to call them and tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will give you the house back. I will find a way to repay the money. Just call them off, please. You cannot unring a bell with the federal government, Andre, I stated simply. And even if I could, I would not. You crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Please find a good defense lawyer. I hung up the phone without waiting for another pathetic plea and slid the device back into my pocket. The absolute silence that followed was deeply satisfying. Andre was officially neutralized, but the financial freeze I had initiated did not just stop with his brokerage accounts. It hit every single line of credit attached to his fraudulent ecosystem. That meant Lexi and Beatrice were about to experience the exact same terrifying freefall. Around noon, notifications on my phone started lighting up with frantic activity from the family group chat. I did not open the app right away. I simply watched the preview banners flash across my lock screen. Lexi was the first to realize something was wrong. She had taken her wealthy friends out for a lavish champagne brunch at a high-end bistro in Soho. According to her frantic text to Andre, her titanium credit card had declined in front of everyone. She complained that the waiter humiliated her by asking if she had an alternative form of payment. She sent 5 consecutive messages demanding Andre call the bank and fix whatever stupid glitch was happening. 10 minutes later, Beatrice chimed in. Her text lacked her usual polished grammar. She was at the event planner office finalizing the expensive floral arrangements for her highly anticipated charity gala, scheduled for the following evening. The massive deposit she attempted to wire from her newly established wealth management account bounced instantly. The bank teller informed her over the phone that a federal hold had been placed on her entire portfolio. Beatrice demanded to know if Andre mismanaged the house sale funds. She was panicking, realizing that without that liquid money, the caterers and decorators would walk out, leaving her precious charity gala an empty, embarrassing shell. They were running in circles, blindly bumping into the walls of the invisible cage I built around them. They still thought it was a banking error. They still thought Andre could simply make a few phone calls and charm his way out of the problem. It was time to pull back the curtain and let them see exactly who was orchestrating their massive downfall. I retrieved the heavy manila folder from my hidden wall safe. I pulled out the original private trust document my grandfather signed 17 years ago. The paper was crisp and heavy, carrying the absolute weight of federal law. The top half of the document clearly outlined my sole ownership of the Hamptons estate and explicitly stated that Beatrice was legally barred from acting as an executor in any capacity. But the bottom half of the document contained the poison pill clause. That clause was my ultimate weapon, and I was not ready to reveal it until they were standing in front of an audience they could not escape. I took a piece of thick black construction paper and carefully covered the bottom half of the document, hiding the punitive damages clause. I laid the paper flat on my marble kitchen counter, ensuring the lighting was perfect. I pulled out my phone and snapped a high-resolution photograph. The top paragraph and my grandfather's distinct, authentic signature were perfectly legible. I opened the family group chat. Lexi and Beatrice were still rapid-fire texting Andre, begging him to pick up. I uploaded the redacted photograph and watched the loading bar complete. Underneath the image, I typed a single caption. "Did you really think Grandpa did not know you would try this? See you at the gala." I hit send. The effect was instantaneous. The 3 typing bubbles at the bottom of the screen completely vanished. For 2 full minutes, there was dead silence in the digital chat room. I could picture them staring at their glowing screens, their blood running cold, as the terrifying reality finally sank in. They recognized my grandfather's signature. They saw the official federal notary stamp from 17 years ago. They realized the fake will they had submitted to the county clerk was not just useless, but a documented piece of criminal perjury. Then my phone began ringing violently. First it was Beatrice, then it was Lexi, then Beatrice again. They called back to back, desperate to control the narrative, desperate to threaten me, beg me, or scream at me. I placed my phone on silent and tossed it onto the couch. I had no intention of speaking to them in private ever again. The next time I saw my mother and sister, it was going to be under the bright chandeliers of her charity gala. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped the garment bag hanging on the closet door. Inside was a stunning floor-length emerald green gown. I was going to give Beatrice exactly what she always wanted, a spectacle that high society would never forget. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Every inch of the space was dripping in white orchids and illuminated by massive crystal chandeliers. This was Beatrice's annual Spring Hope Charity Gala. On paper, it was an event dedicated to raising funds for underprivileged youth. In reality, it was her ultimate vanity project. It was the one night a year where she could command the attention of Manhattan elite politicians and billionaires to solidify her status as the reigning matriarch of high society. The press line outside was packed with photographers shouting names and blinding guests with relentless flashbulbs. I stepped out of my town car, letting the emerald green silk of my gown pool gracefully around my heels. I walked the red carpet with the cool, absolute confidence of a woman who held the executioner's axe. Inside, the air hummed with the sound of a live string quartet and the clinking of champagne flutes. I accepted a glass from a passing waiter and positioned myself near a towering floral arrangement that offered a perfect vantage point of the main floor. It did not take long to spot my family. They were standing near the VIP tables, positioned directly in front of the press cameras. To the untrained eye, they looked like the perfect American dynasty. Beatrice was draped in a silver sequined gown, wearing her signature diamond necklace. Lexi was wearing a custom couture dress, holding tightly to Andre's arm. Andre was in a pristine black tuxedo, his hair perfectly styled. But I was not an untrained eye. I was a forensic auditor. I knew how to look past the expensive packaging and see the terrified reality hiding underneath. As I watched them closely, the cracks in their flawless facade were painfully obvious. Beatrice was smiling at a state senator, but the smile did not reach her eyes. Her posture was rigidly stiff, and her hands kept clenching around her silver evening clutch. She was frantically scanning the room not to greet friends, but to dodge the event coordinators. I knew for a fact that the catering company, the florists, and the string quartet had not been paid because her accounts were locked. She was hosting $1 million party with zero liquid cash, terrified that a vendor might pull the plug. Andre looked significantly worse. He was sweating profusely under the bright ballroom lights. He kept pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket to dab his forehead, completely ignoring the polite conversation happening around him. A wealthy real estate developer slapped him on the back to congratulate him on the Hamptons property sale, and I watched Andre's face turn the color of wet ash. He managed a weak nod and immediately signaled a waiter to bring him a double scotch. He was drinking heavily, trying to numb the terrifying reality that his brokerage license was suspended, and federal investigators were currently tearing through his professional life. He knew the men he was drinking with tonight would treat him like a contagious disease tomorrow. Lexi was arguably the most pathetic of the three. Her influencer persona was built on projecting effortless confidence, but tonight she looked like a frightened child. She kept whispering frantically into Andre's ear, tugging at his sleeve, and throwing paranoid glances at the ballroom entrance. She was waiting for me. The redacted photograph I sent to the group chat had successfully shattered her delusion. She knew her penthouse, her designer clothes, and her perfect marriage were all funded by a stolen inheritance. She knew I had the power to take it all away, and she was suffocating under that doom. I took a slow sip of my champagne. They were trapped in a psychological prison of their own making. They could not leave the gala because backing out of her own charity event would instantly spark rumors of financial ruin in Beatrice's social circles. They had to stand there and smile for the cameras, while their entire world burned to the ground behind the scenes. They were sweating bullets, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of a powerful, unified family. I watched Beatrice corner a wealthy tech billionaire pulling out a pledge card with aggressive desperation. She was trying to secure physical checks tonight, hoping she could deposit them into a different bank account tomorrow to cover the bouncing vendor checks. It was a pathetic display of a woman who valued her social standing more than her freedom. I handed my empty glass to a waiter and smoothed my emerald gown. The cocktail hour was ending. The event coordinator was tapping the microphone on the main stage, signaling the guests to take their seats. It was time for Beatrice to deliver her opening remarks, and it was time for me to deliver my final audit. I stepped out from the shadow of the towering floral arrangement and began my walk across the main floor. The heavy emerald silk of my gown swept silently over the polished marble as I moved toward the center aisle. The room was settling down. Hundreds of wealthy donors were taking their seats at the elaborately decorated tables. Up at the front, Beatrice handed her empty champagne flute to a passing waiter and prepared to make her grand ascent up the stage stairs. She smoothed her silver sequined dress and practiced her benevolent smile. She had not spotted me yet. Before I could reach the halfway point of the ballroom, two large men in dark suits stepped directly into my path. They were private security hired specifically to keep uninvited press and unwanted guests away from the VIP section. One of them held up a thick hand and gave me a stern look. He asked to see my platinum donor lanyard, or my seating assignment. I did not have either. I had bypassed the main registration desk entirely. He frowned and politely but firmly instructed me to step back into the lobby area until my credentials could be verified. I did not break my stride, and I certainly did not step back. I simply smiled because I knew I did not need a lanyard to bypass private security. I had something significantly better. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a perfectly tailored navy suit stepped out of the crowd and seamlessly took his place at my right side. His name was David Reynolds. He was not just a guest at this gala. He was the District Attorney of New York. David and I went back a long way. 3 years ago, my forensic accounting firm had provided the exact financial data his office needed to dismantle a massive corporate embezzlement ring operating out of Wall Street. I had saved his biggest career case, and we had been close friends ever since. When I called him earlier that afternoon and told him what I had uncovered about my own family, he did not hesitate to offer his personal escort. David looked at the two security guards and casually reached into his breast pocket. He flashed his gold badge. He told them I was his personal guest of honor and that we were heading directly to the front. The guards instantly recognized him. You do not argue with the district attorney in a room full of politicians and press. They immediately stepped aside and murmured their apologies, clearing the path for us. The slight commotion caught Beatrice's attention. She turned her head and finally saw me walking down the center aisle with the top prosecutor in the city by my side. I watched the color rapidly drain from her face. Her perfectly rehearsed benevolent smile shattered into a look of absolute horror. She glanced frantically at Andre, who was already staring at David Reynolds like he was looking at the Grim Reaper himself. Andre knew exactly who David was. Every corrupt broker in the city knew the man who handed out federal indictments. Beatrice panicked. She could not let me reach the stage. She abandoned her position near the podium and practically sprinted down the aisle to intercept me, her silver heels clicking frantically against the floor. She plastered a wide, fake smile onto her face for the benefit of the watching photographers, but her eyes were wide with pure terror. She reached out and grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "Sienna, what on earth are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath, keeping her voice incredibly low so the surrounding tables could not hear. Her teeth were clenched together. "You need to leave right now. You are not ruining this night for me. I swear to God, if you cause a scene in front of these people, I will destroy you. Get out." I stopped walking and looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not pull away. I just looked at her with an expression of absolute pity. "You are the one causing a scene, Beatrice," I whispered back, my tone light and perfectly conversational. "And you cannot destroy me. You do not even have enough money in your accounts to pay for the floral arrangement standing right behind you. I am simply here to deliver a message about family legacy." I gently peeled her fingers off my arm. I gave her a warm smile, making the press photographers snap rapid pictures. I turned my attention to the stage just as the coordinator leaned into the microphone to introduce the host. I walked past her frozen body, heading directly toward the velvet stairs of the main podium. I climbed the velvet stairs with deliberate slowness, feeling the weight of the emerald silk trailing behind me. The hired host, a local television anchor, was just adjusting his tie and preparing to read his cue cards. I stepped up to the podium, giving him a polite but authoritative nod. I gently took the microphone from his hands before he could utter a single syllable. He looked confused, but seeing me dressed in couture and walking with absolute purpose, he assumed I was part of the scheduled program. He stepped aside, yielding the stage to me. The murmurs of the wealthy donors and politicians sitting at the tables faded away. The clinking of silverware against fine china stopped entirely. The grand ballroom fell into a hushed, expectant silence. They were waiting for a heartwarming story about the charity's mission. They were waiting for a touching family tribute. I adjusted the microphone stand and looked out over the sea of wealthy faces. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Lexi frantically waving her hands. She was standing near the VIP table, her face pale and contorted with absolute panic. She glared intensely at the back of the room, violently slashing a finger across her throat in a universal gesture to cut the audio. She was trying to signal the sound technician to kill my microphone before I could speak. I watched her desperation with quiet amusement. What Lexi did not know was that the audiovisual booth was no longer under the control of the hotel staff. Earlier today, I sent my private tech team to the venue under the guise of an emergency equipment inspection requested by the district attorney. My people were currently sitting behind the soundboard, ensuring my microphone would remain perfectly live. Lexi realized her frantic signals were being completely ignored. She slumped back against Andre's side, looking like she was about to physically collapse. "Good evening, everyone." I began, my voice echoing smoothly through the massive overhead speakers. "For those who do not know me, my name is Sienna. I am Beatrice's eldest daughter. I am here tonight to offer a very special family tribute." I paused, letting the guests offer a brief, polite round of applause. I looked directly at Beatrice, who was frozen at the end of the center aisle, her eyes burning with hatred and absolute terror. "We are all gathered here tonight under the beautiful banner of philanthropy." I continued, gripping the edges of the podium. "We are here to talk about legacy." My mother absolutely loves that word. She loves to talk about building a secure future for the next generation. She loves to stand in front of flashing cameras and present herself as a woman who sacrifices everything to help those who are vulnerable. "It is an incredibly beautiful narrative," I said, my voice dropping to a serious tone. "But as a forensic accountant, I have learned that narratives are easily fabricated. Numbers, on the other hand, do not lie." The room shifted noticeably. A few high-profile politicians exchanged confused glances. The press photographers at the edge of the room instantly sensed a shift in the atmosphere and hoisted their cameras higher, snapping rapid pictures. I kept my tone perfectly pleasant, but the words carried the sharp edge of a scalpel. "True legacy is not built on lavish galas and expensive white orchids," I said, looking directly down at the VIP tables where my family stood shivering. "True legacy is built on honesty. It is built on how you treat people behind closed doors when the cameras are turned off and the bank accounts are finally laid bare." "My mother is asking all of you to write massive checks tonight to support her charitable vision," I announced, projecting my voice to reach the back of the ballroom. "She is asking for your blind trust. But before you open your wallets and hand over your hard-earned wealth, I think it is only fair that you understand exactly how she manages the assets already entrusted to her own family. Generosity is a very easy mask to wear when you are spending someone else's stolen money." The silence in the ballroom was no longer expectant or polite. It was heavy and suffocating. David Reynolds stood near the front row, watching the systematic dismantling of a corrupt socialite with quiet professional approval. Beatrice took a hesitant, shaking step toward the stage, her face flushed an angry red. She opened her mouth to shout something, but her voice completely failed her. She was entirely paralyzed by the blinding spotlight she had paid over $1 million to set up. She had absolutely nowhere to hide. Every single camera lens in the room was now focused entirely on her terrified and guilty expression. I raised my free hand, giving a subtle cue to the audiovisual booth. Instantly, the massive digital screens flanking the stage flashed to life. The guests gasped as the bright charity logos disappeared, replaced by a crisp, high-definition video feed. It was not a montage of Beatrice's philanthropic achievements. It was a recording taken inside a familiar wood-paneled law office exactly 17 years ago. On the massive screens, my grandfather sat tall and authoritative in a leather wingback chair. My grandmother sat beside him holding his hand. They looked so incredibly vibrant and alive. A collective murmur rippled through the gala as many older wealthy donors immediately recognized the patriarch of our family. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She recognized the room. She recognized the lawyer sitting off-camera who was prompting my grandfather to state his full legal name and the current date for the record. My grandfather looked directly into the camera lens. His voice boomed through the surround sound speakers echoing off the crystal chandeliers. I am recording this statement to serve as an indisputable video addendum to the private trust established for my granddaughter Sienna, he stated firmly. I am doing this, of sound mind and absolute conviction, because I know my daughter Beatrice will eventually attempt to contest my written will. I know this because she is a financial predator. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of shocked whispers. A prominent state senator in the front row dropped his fork onto his china plate. The press photographers went into a complete frenzy, pivoting their heavy lenses from the stage to the screens, and then directly onto Beatrice, who was now trembling violently in the center aisle. My grandfather did not stop there. He leaned forward, his expression hardening into one of profound disappointment. Beatrice has a documented history of severe financial manipulation. He continued, his voice unwavering. I watched her systematically hide assets to bankrupt her ex-husband during their divorce. I recently caught her forging signatures to drain Sienna's college tuition fund. She uses deceit to fund a lifestyle she has not earned. Let this video serve as absolute legal proof that under no circumstances is Beatrice ever to be named an executor of my estate. She is legally barred from accessing, managing, or transferring any property or liquid assets belonging to Sienna. Any document claiming otherwise that surfaces after my death is a blatant forgery crafted by my daughter. My grandmother leaned into the frame, her expression equally resolute. We love our daughter, she said, her voice thick with emotion, but we refuse to let her greed destroy Sienna's future. This trust is ironclad. Beatrice has no authority. The video paused, freezing on the image of my grandparents staring out over the silent, horrified crowd. The impact was nuclear. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for Beatrice to spin this as a clerical error. Her own father had reached beyond the grave to testify against her in front of everyone she wanted to impress. He had publicly labeled her a predator and legally stripped her of the power she had just fraudulently claimed to possess. I looked down at the VIP tables. Andre was desperately trying to inch his way toward the side exit. His custom tuxedo was completely drenched in sweat. He realized the video did not just ruin Beatrice's social standing, it provided undeniable federal evidence that the will they submitted to the county clerk was entirely fabricated. If the rightful owners explicitly stated on video that Beatrice had zero legal authority, then Andre's entire real estate transaction was built on a foundation of federal wire fraud and perjury. He was trying to slip out before the authorities could put the pieces together. David Reynolds stepped slightly to the left, blocking the main aisle. He gave Andre a cold, professional glare, freezing the corrupt broker in his tracks. Andre knew the district attorney was not just a guest tonight. He was a witness to a massive public confession. Lexi was openly sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. The influencer who lived her life for the cameras was now desperately trying to hide from them. Beatrice was entirely broken. The wealthy donors she had spent decades cultivating were looking at her with open disgust. The politicians she tried to bribe were already stepping away from her table, not wanting to be photographed near a confirmed fraudster. Her mask of benevolent generosity was completely shattered, leaving nothing but the greedy, desperate reality underneath. I gripped the podium, waiting for the chaotic noise to settle. I was not finished yet. The video was just the introduction. It was time to reveal the final, devastating consequence of their actions. The video feed faded to black, leaving the ballroom in total silence before the screen illuminated again. It displayed the high-resolution photograph I sent to the family group chat earlier. It was the original trust document. Unlike the image they received on their phones, this version was entirely unredacted. I gripped the sides of the podium. My grandfather knew that a simple video would not be enough to stop a woman who viewed rules as mere suggestions, I announced. He knew Beatrice would eventually find a corrupt broker to bypass legal procedures. So he worked with his legal team to insert a highly specific lethal contingency into the trust. In forensic accounting, we call it a poison pill. I gestured toward the massive screens behind me. I want you all to read the bottom paragraph, I said. But since my mother seems to have trouble comprehending legal boundaries, I will read it aloud for her. I looked directly at Beatrice, who was standing paralyzed in the center aisle. Clause Section 4, Paragraph B, I recited from memory. Should Beatrice intentionally attempt to sell, transfer, or alter the assets within this trust through fraud, coercion, or forgery, a punitive damages protocol is immediately enacted. Upon documented proof of such interference, ownership of all Beatrice's current personal assets, including her primary residence, financial portfolios, and independent trusts, will automatically default to Sienna as absolute compensation. A collective gasp ripped through the crowd. The sheer magnitude of the clause was unprecedented, but perfectly legal under the specific trust laws my grandfather had utilized. He had essentially set a financial bear trap. If Beatrice tried to steal my inheritance, she would automatically forfeit her entire net worth. Beatrice began shaking her head violently. "No," she whispered. "That is not legal. You cannot do that. You cannot take my apartment. You cannot take my money." "Oh, it is incredibly legal, Beatrice," I replied, unwavering. "It is a self-executing punitive clause. The moment you forged my grandfather's signature and submitted that fake will to the county clerk, you triggered the trap. You did not just commit a federal felony. You legally signed over the deed to your Upper East Side penthouse to me. You transferred ownership of your offshore wealth management accounts directly into my name. Every single asset you thought you were protecting when you stole my house now legally belongs to me." I looked around the lavish ballroom, gesturing to the expensive white orchids. "Since you used the stolen funds from my Hamptons estate to pay the initial deposits for this very event, I technically own this gala too," I noted dryly. "As the rightful owner, I officially refuse to cover your remaining balances. The vendors catering this event will pursue you personally for the outstanding debts. Since your bank accounts are frozen under a federal hold, I highly doubt you will pay them." The state senator in the front row stood up from his table and walked straight toward the exit. He was closely followed by several other politicians. They were fleeing the ballroom like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Nobody wanted to be photographed at an event hosted by a broke, fraudulent criminal. Lexi let out a loud, wailing sob, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She grabbed Andre's arm, shaking him frantically. "Do something!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "Fix it!" But Andre could not fix anything. He stared at the floor, completely defeated. He knew the poison pill clause meant the money to pay his massive commercial debts was gone forever. There was no secret fund to save his fake brokerage. They were utterly ruined. I looked back down at Beatrice. "Yesterday you sat at a luxury dinner table and tried to hand me a $50,000 invoice for living in my own house," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous volume. "You called me selfish. You told me I owed this family for everything you have given me. Well, Beatrice, consider the debt fully paid. You wanted to play a high-stakes game with my future. You gambled everything you had on the assumption that I would be too weak to fight back. You thought I would stay silent to protect the family name. You lost absolutely everything." The reality of her situation finally crashed over her. She was no longer the wealthy matriarch of a powerful Manhattan dynasty. She was a homeless, penniless woman facing decades in federal prison. Her knees buckled beneath her and she collapsed onto the plush carpet of the center aisle. She stared blankly at the ceiling, completely unresponsive to the flashing cameras surrounding her. I stepped back from the podium, leaving the microphone live. The trap had fully snapped shut, and there was no escape. The silence that followed my final words was completely deafening. It was not the polite quiet of a captivated audience, but the tense, breathless pause right before a massive structural collapse. The realization of what the poison pill clause actually meant was rippling through the room like a shockwave. It hit the front row of VIP tables the hardest. These were not just charitable donors. They were heavy-hitting real estate developers and private equity managers. They were the men who had blindly trusted Andre with millions of dollars in commercial bridge loans. I watched a prominent venture capitalist sitting directly across from Lexi slowly put down his crystal water glass. His face was entirely pale. He looked at Andre and then looked back up at the massive digital screen displaying the federal trust document. He did the math in his head. If Beatrice had forfeited her entire net worth to me as punitive damages, that meant the secret accounts Andre was using to float his failing brokerage were now completely empty. The cash he had promised his investors was legally mine. The venture capitalist stood up abruptly, knocking his heavy wooden chair backward. He did not say a single word to Andre. He just pulled out his phone and began dialing frantically, undoubtedly calling his own legal team to mitigate the massive financial crater Andre had just blown into his portfolio. Within seconds, 3 other investors at the table followed suit, abandoning the gala in a panicked rush. Andre watched his last remaining lifelines walk out the door. He tried to take a step forward, perhaps to chase after them and beg for mercy. But a firm hand clamped down hard on his shoulder. It was not a security guard. While the entire ballroom was distracted by the video confession and the ensuing chaos, David Reynolds had given a quiet signal to the back doors. 4 men in dark tactical windbreakers over formal suits had seamlessly slipped into the grand ballroom. They were United States Marshals. They did not shout or draw weapons. They moved with terrifying professional efficiency, navigating the sea of white orchids and panicked socialites until they completely surrounded Andre's table. The lead marshal, a tall man with a stern face and a silver badge clipped to his belt, leaned in close to Andre. His voice was low, but the live microphone on the stage picked up the cold, authoritative tone. Andre, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, interstate forgery, and conspiracy to commit financial theft. He grabbed Andre's right arm and swiftly pulled it behind his back. The distinct metallic click of heavy handcuffs, echoing through the silent room, was the loudest sound I had ever heard. Andre did not resist. He did not claim he was innocent or demand to speak to a lawyer. His shoulders slumped forward, and all the artificial executive charm completely drained from his body. He looked like a hollow, empty shell. He knew the forensic trail I had submitted to the SEC was absolute. He knew he was going to federal prison for a very long time. Lexi, however, did not have the capacity to process reality. As the marshals began to march Andre away from the table, her brain simply broke. She let out a blood-curdling, hysterical scream that shattered the remaining tension in the room. She lunged forward, grabbing the sleeve of Andre's custom tuxedo and trying to anchor him to the floor. "No!" she shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the overhead speakers. "You cannot take him! We have a penthouse! He is a vice president! You are ruining my brand! Stop it! Leave him alone!" It was a pathetic, horrifying display of pure delusion. The influencer who obsessed over perfectly curated aesthetics was now rolling on the floor of the Plaza Hotel, screaming about her brand while federal agents dragged her husband away in handcuffs. The press photographers swarmed the aisle, their camera flashes blinding her as they captured every single second of her public breakdown. Tomorrow morning, her sobbing face would be on the front page of every tabloid in the city. One of the marshals gently but firmly peeled Lex's hands off Andre's jacket, stepping between them so the arrest could proceed. Andre did not even look back at her as they led him out the side exit. He just kept his head down, disappearing into the shadows of the hotel corridor. I stood on the stage looking down at the absolute wreckage of my family. Beatrice was still lying on the carpet, completely catatonic. Lexi was sobbing into the tablecloth, her fake empire entirely dissolved. The wealthy guests were flooding toward the exits, desperate to distance themselves from the scandal. I pressed the power button on the podium microphone. The sharp click echoed briefly before the ballroom plunged into a hollow, terrifying silence. I did not stay to watch the hotel staff clean up the wreckage of my mother's vanity project. I walked down the velvet stairs, past the empty tables, and stepped out into the cool Manhattan night. The flashing lights of police cruisers were already reflecting off the glass doors of the plaza. I got into my waiting car and went home. I slept for 10 unbroken hours. When I woke up the next morning, the entire world had changed. The scandal did not just make the local news, it made the front page of the New York Times. The headline was brutal and precise. High society scam real estate broker arrested for federal fraud at mother's charity gala. The article detailed every single aspect of the forged will, the stolen trust fund, and the dramatic arrest in front of hundreds of wealthy donors. My forensic timeline had been leaked to the press, likely by an angry investor seeking public vengeance. There was no spin room clever enough to save them from the raw published data. They were exposed as absolute frauds to millions of readers over their morning coffee. The digital fallout was even faster and far more vicious. Lexi had spent years curating an audience of 2 million followers who idolized her fake billionaire aesthetic. But the internet is ruthless when it discovers it has been lied to. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the comment section on every single one of her videos turned into an absolute war zone. People scrutinized her past posts, identifying the cheap knockoffs she tried to pass as couture and mocking her rented lifestyle. The real devastation, however, came from her corporate sponsors. Luxury fashion brands and high-end cosmetic companies do not associate with federal crimes. Within hours, a massive tidal wave of public statements flooded social media. Every single brand sponsor dropped her. They terminated her contracts, canceled her affiliate links, and demanded immediate returns of any borrowed merchandise. Her influencer empire evaporated into thin air before lunchtime. She went from making thousands of dollars a post to having zero income and a husband sitting in a federal holding cell. While Lexi was watching her digital life burn, I was sitting in my corner office executing the final legal maneuvers. David Reynolds and his team had fast-tracked the validation of the poison pill clause. Because my grandfather had used a self-executing trust protocol, there was no need for a lengthy trial to transfer the assets. The moment the county clerk verified the forgery, the punitive damages were automatically legally binding. My attorneys spent the morning securing the titles to Beatrice's accounts. The wealth management portfolio she opened with my stolen equity was frozen and then formally transferred into my name. Her checking accounts, her savings, her offshore investments, all of it belonged to me. But the most satisfying piece of paper was the deed to her Upper East Side penthouse. For decades, Beatrice had used that luxurious apartment as her ultimate status symbol. It was her fortress of superiority. Now it was just another asset listed under my forensic portfolio. At exactly 2 in the afternoon, a process server walked past the doorman of her building, holding a thick manila envelope. Beatrice was locked inside the penthouse, hiding from the aggressive paparazzi swarming the sidewalks below. When she finally opened her door, she was not greeted with sympathy or a lifeline. She was handed a formal 30-day eviction notice. I sat at my desk looking at the digital confirmation from the process server. I could easily picture the exact look of absolute horror on her face when she read the document. She was officially a squatter in my apartment. I knew she would immediately reach for her phone to call Mr. Thorne or any other high-powered defense attorney she could think of. But she was about to discover a very cold, hard truth about the legal system. Shark attorneys require massive retainers, and Beatrice did not have a single dollar to her name. Her credit cards were canceled. Her checking accounts were emptied. She could not even afford to buy a cup of coffee, let alone hire a legal team to fight a federal eviction. She had built her entire identity around the illusion of untouchable wealth and power. Now she was completely stripped bare, facing the terrifying reality of poverty and federal prosecution without a single ally in the world. The morning after the gala was not just a simple public reckoning. It was the complete and total financial eradication of the very same people who foolishly tried to destroy me for good. It was exactly 3 days after the process server delivered the eviction notice when the intercom on my polished mahogany desk buzzed. My receptionist sounded uncomfortable. She told me 2 women were standing in the lobby crying frantically and refusing to leave until they spoke with me. They were causing a scene and making the other corporate clients nervous. I did not need to check the security cameras to know who was disrupting my floor. I immediately and calmly instructed her to send them straight back to my corner office and hold all my calls. I closed my forensic spreadsheets and folded my hands neatly on my polished desk, patiently waiting for the very final act of their extremely desperate tragedy to unfold right now. The heavy glass door swung open, and Beatrice and Lexi stumbled inside. The visual contrast from the glamorous charity gala just a few nights ago was absolutely staggering. Beatrice was no longer the perfectly styled matriarch dripping in diamonds. She was wearing an oversized trench coat and dark sunglasses indoors. Her hair was unkempt and she looked like she had aged 10 years in 72 hours. Lexi looked even worse. The former influencer who refused to wear the same outfit twice was dressed in wrinkled gray sweatpants and a stained hoodie. Her face was completely bare, and her eyes were swollen and red from days of nonstop crying. They looked completely broken. Beatrice did not wait for the door to close before she collapsed into one of the leather guest chairs. She pulled off her sunglasses, revealing dark bruised circles under her eyes. "Sienna, please," she choked out, her voice a desperate raspy whisper. "You have to stop this. You made your point. You publicly humiliated me. You sent Andre to jail. You took my dignity. But you cannot actually throw me out of my own home. That eviction notice has to be a mistake. We are your family. We are your own blood. You cannot leave your mother on the street." Lexi stood behind Beatrice's chair, gripping the leather backrest. She started sobbing loudly, wiping her nose on the sleeve of her hoodie. "I have absolutely nothing left, Sienna," she wailed. "The federal agents seized my bank accounts this morning. The landlord locked me out of the penthouse because the rent check bounced. I had to sleep on a lobby couch last night. Andre is sitting in a federal detention center and his lawyer will not even return my calls. You ruined my life. Give the money back. We are blood." I sat perfectly still, watching them perform their pathetic routine. They were crying real tears, but they were not tears of remorse. They were crying because they were finally experiencing the consequences of their own actions. They expected my biological programming to kick in and save them from the misery they built with their own hands. I did not hand them a tissue. I did not offer them water. I looked at them with the cold, detached precision of an auditor examining a bankrupt spreadsheet. "Do not ever use the word blood in my office again," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Blood is a biological accident. Loyalty is a choice." The time for family loyalty completely expired the morning I drove to the Hamptons and found the locks changed on my front door. It expired when you laughed in my face at a luxury restaurant and tried to extort $50,000 from me. It permanently died the moment you walked into a mediation room and threatened to have me locked in a psychiatric ward just so you could steal my inheritance. Beatrice flinched as if I had physically struck her. "But I am your mother," she sobbed, reaching a shaking hand across my desk. "And I was your daughter," I shot back immediately. "But you would have gladly left me homeless and institutionalized to protect your fraudulent social status. You forged a federal document to steal my house. You gambled your entire net worth on the arrogant assumption that I was too weak to fight back. You lost the game, Beatrice. The poison pill clause is legally binding. I own your penthouse. I own your portfolios. You are currently trespassing in my corporate office, and legally speaking, you have exactly 27 days to vacate my residential property." Lexi let out a loud scream. "You are a monster," she yelled, stomping her foot. "You have millions of dollars. You do not even need our money. It is not about needing the money, Lexi," I replied smoothly. "It is about enforcing the math." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "However, because I am more generous than you, I am willing to offer you one single final lifeline today." I opened my center drawer and pulled out a single piece of paper attached to a thick legal packet. I placed it on the desk and spun it around so it faced my mother. This is a legally binding lease agreement for a 2-bedroom apartment in a very modest building in Queens, I explained. I have already prepaid the rent for exactly 1 year. It has running water, electricity, and basic appliances. It is not a penthouse overlooking Central Park, but it will keep you off the winter streets when the marshals officially lock you out of my Upper East Side property. Lexi stopped sobbing and stared at me like I had just slapped her across the face. Queens, she repeated, her voice trembling with absolute disgust. You expect me to live in a basic apartment in Queens? Sienna, I am a public figure. I cannot be seen living in a low-income neighborhood. People will take pictures of me. You are not a public figure, Lexi, I corrected her sharply. You are the unemployed wife of an indicted federal criminal. You do not have a brand to protect anymore. You have a severe survival problem. You can either sign the lease and have a safe roof over your head, or you can take your chances at a crowded city shelter. The choice is entirely yours to make. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes frantically scanning the document. She was looking for the catch. She knew I did not do anything without a meticulously calculated reason. She flipped to the second page and her eyes widened as she read the bolded legal text. What is this clause? She asked, her voice shaking. That is the steel boundary, I replied, leaning back in my chair. The prepaid lease is completely contingent upon your strict adherence to a lifetime no-contact order. If you sign this document, you are legally agreeing to never contact me again. You will not call me. You will not text me. You will not send me emails, letters, or messages through third parties. You will not approach me in public or show up at my place of work ever again. If you violate this agreement even once, the lease is immediately nullified and you will be evicted from the Queen's apartment within 24 hours. Beatrice stared at me, her mouth slightly open. You are cutting us off completely, she whispered. You are throwing away your own family. I am cutting off a parasite, I corrected her. I am protecting my peace. You spent my entire life making me feel like I was a massive burden. You used my father, you used my grandparents, and you tried to use me to fund a fantasy world that never actually existed. I am putting a permanent end to the cycle right now. This is not a negotiation, Beatrice. This is the absolute only charity you are ever going to receive from me. Beatrice looked down at the pen resting on top of the legal packet. Her hand hovered over it, trembling violently. For a brief moment, I saw the arrogant matriarch try to claw her way back to the surface. I saw the pride flare in her eyes as she prepared to reject the offer and storm out of my office to maintain her dignity. But the flare died almost instantly. The crushing weight of reality finally broke her. She had no money. She had no friends left in high society. Her credit was completely destroyed. She was facing federal wire fraud charges, and she needed a permanent address just to apply for a public defender. She had absolutely no power left. I had methodically stripped away every single weapon she had ever used to control people. She let out a long, defeated breath that sounded like a physical surrender. She picked up the heavy gold pen. Lexi grabbed her arm. Mom, you cannot sign that, she pleaded. We can fight this. We can call Uncle George. We can start a crowdfunding campaign. We do not have to live in Queens and follow her psychotic rules. Beatrice yanked her arm away from Lexi with surprising force. Shut up, Lexi, she snapped, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. Uncle George will not even answer my phone calls. Nobody is going to give us money. We have absolutely nothing left. Beatrice lowered her head and pressed the pen to the paper. Her hand shook as she signed her name on the dotted line. It was not the elegant, sweeping signature she had forged on my grandfather's will. It was a messy, jagged scrawl of a woman who had been utterly defeated. She flipped to the next page and signed the no-contact agreement, cementing her absolute isolation from my life. She pushed the packet back across the desk. She did not look at me. Her pride was completely shattered. I picked up the packet and checked the signatures, ensuring they were legally sound. I pulled a set of brass keys from my pocket and dropped them onto the polished mahogany desk. The address is on the front page, I said quietly. You have 27 days to move your personal belongings out of my penthouse. Do not attempt to take any of the luxury furniture or the artwork. My legal team has already inventoried the entire property, and anything missing will be reported as theft, adding to your list of pending federal charges. You will take only your clothing and personal effects. Beatrice stood up slowly, picking up the keys with a trembling hand. She turned around and walked heavily toward the glass door. Lexi followed close behind her, wiping her face and looking back at me with a mixture of terror and pure hatred. They walked out of my office, and the heavy glass door clicked shut behind them. I sat alone in the quiet room, feeling an overwhelming sense of finality. The war was officially over. It took 6 months for the federal courts to untangle the massive web of financial crimes Andre and Beatrice had woven, but the justice system moves with brutal efficiency when the evidence is indisputable. Andre accepted a plea deal for a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary to avoid a drawn-out public trial. Beatrice and Lexi quietly moved into the Queen's apartment. I never heard from them again. The lifetime no-contact order held firm. They were completely erased from my daily existence, leaving behind a profound and welcome silence. On a crisp Tuesday morning in late October, I drove my car down the familiar winding roads of the Long Island coastline. The air was sharp and smelled heavily of sea salt and damp pine needles. I turned onto the private gravel driveway of my grandfather's estate. The massive wooden post at the end of the road was completely bare. The obnoxious glossy sold sign that Andre's brokerage had hammered into the grass was gone forever. I pulled up to the heavy wrought iron security gates. I punched in the original code my grandfather had set decades ago. The green light flashed, and the gates swung open smoothly, welcoming me home. I parked my car on the circular stone driveway and cut the engine. I stepped out and looked up at the massive oceanfront property. The federal courts had formally invalidated the forged quitclaim deed and entirely reversed the fraudulent sale. The title was fully and permanently restored to my name. I unlocked the heavy oak front door and stepped into the grand foyer. The house was completely empty. The wealthy cash buyer who thought he scored a massive discount had been forced to vacate the premises and take his expensive modern furniture with him. I walked slowly through the echoing hallways. My footsteps tapped rhythmically against the original hardwood floors. I ran my hand along the intricate wooden banister of the main staircase. In the past, walking through this massive empty house used to fill me with a deep, lingering sense of melancholy. It used to feel like a heavy monument to my broken family and the relentless toxic expectations of my mother. But today, the atmosphere was completely different. The shadows had vanished. I walked through the sunlit rooms, not with sadness, but with a profound sense of absolute power. I had faced the darkest, most manipulative parts of my own bloodline, and I had completely shattered them, using nothing but truth and mathematics. I stepped out onto the expansive back patio. The natural sand dunes rolled gently down toward the crashing gray waves of the Atlantic Ocean. The wind whipped through my hair. I took a deep breath, letting the cold ocean air fill my lungs. This house was no longer a burden. It was a fortress. It was the physical manifestation of my grandfather's protective love and my own unyielding resilience. But I knew I could not just live here alone. Keeping a massive estate like this empty and silent felt like a waste of the incredible security it offered. Generational wealth was meant to build a future, but Beatrice was wrong about whose future it was supposed to serve. The sound of heavy tires crunching against the gravel driveway pulled me from my thoughts. I walked back through the house and opened the front door. 3 large white commercial vans had just parked next to my car. A crew of workers in hard hats and heavy boots began unloading tool belts and rolls of architectural blueprints. A tall woman in a sharp blazer and steel-toed boots walked up the front steps holding a clipboard. She was the lead contractor I had hired from a highly reputable Manhattan firm. "Good morning, Sienna," she said, extending her hand. "We have the permits cleared with the county. Are you ready to do the final walkthrough before we start tearing down the interior walls?" I shook her hand firmly. "I am ready," I replied. We walked into the main living room. She unrolled the blueprints across a wooden folding table her crew had just set up. The new architectural plans completely reimagined the massive single-family estate. We were not updating the kitchen or adding a luxury infinity pool to flip the property for a profit. We were tearing down the massive master suites to build 12 private independent residential units. We were converting the sprawling dining room into a communal dining hall and turning the private library into a fully staffed legal clinic and trauma counseling center. I was converting the Hamptons estate into a private, secure retreat for women who were actively escaping domestic and financial abuse. I knew exactly how terrifying it was to have someone manipulate your reality and try to strip away your financial independence to keep you trapped. I had the education and the resources to fight back and destroy my abusers, but millions of women did not. This house was going to be their fortress now. It would be a safe haven where they could live entirely rent-free while they rebuilt their credit-secured independent employment and filed the necessary legal paperwork to reclaim their lives. The contractor tapped the blueprint with her pen. It is a massive project, Sienna. We are basically building a luxury fortress. It is going to cost a significant amount of capital to maintain this level of privacy and security on the coastline. I smiled, looking out the window at the crashing ocean. Funding is not going to be an issue, I assured her. I recently acquired a very lucrative Upper East Side penthouse and a massive offshore wealth management portfolio. I liquidated all of it last week. The entire principal is sitting in a high-yield trust specifically designed to fund this retreat in perpetuity. My grandfather wanted his wealth to protect the vulnerable from financial predators. I was finally executing his true will. I watched the construction crew begin measuring the walls, feeling a deep, profound sense of peace. The fake legacy of Beatrice and Lexi was dead and buried. The real legacy was just beginning. I stood there for a long time, listening to the rhythmic sounds of hammers and drills echoing through the massive estate. The noise of construction is usually chaotic, but to me it sounded like absolute harmony. It was the sound of a broken history being actively dismantled and reshaped into something with genuine purpose. I walked away from the contractors and stepped back out onto the wooden deck, letting the ocean breeze wash over me one last time before heading back to the city. I want you to think about the people you call your family. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to believe that blood is the ultimate unbreakable bond. Society teaches us that unconditional love means unconditional access. We are told to forgive the unforgivable simply because we share the same DNA. We are expected to absorb their toxic behavior, their financial recklessness, and their emotional manipulation because family is supposed to be everything. But I am an auditor, and I do not deal in sentimental fairy tales. I deal in hard, objective reality. And the reality is that in America, family is not just blood. It is a legal liability. The people closest to you have the greatest proximity to your vulnerabilities. They know your social security number. They know the passwords to your life. They know exactly which emotional buttons to push to make you feel guilty enough to open your wallet. They can ruin your credit score, forge your signature, and completely derail your future, all while smiling and telling you they love you. If my mother and sister taught me anything, it is that predators do not always hide in dark alleys. Sometimes they wear designer dresses and sit at the head of your Thanksgiving table. They use words like loyalty and legacy as weapons to keep you in line. They will drain you dry to fund their own delusions, and when you finally say no, they will brand you as the villain. But you have to listen to me very carefully. If someone shows you they value money over your existence, believe them the very first time. Do not make excuses for their behavior. Do not tell yourself they are just under a lot of stress or going through a difficult phase. Greed is not a phase. It is a character flaw that will eventually consume everything around it. You have to treat your personal life exactly like a forensic accountant treats a corporate audit. Look closely at the balance sheets of your relationships. Who is constantly making withdrawals without ever making a deposit? Who is using your hard work to subsidize their own laziness? Who makes you feel like you are impossible to love simply because you refuse to be financially exploited? Once you identify the deficits, you have to stop funding them. You have to establish your boundaries, secure your assets, and never apologize for surviving. People will try to make you feel guilty for walking away. Society loves to judge the woman who cuts off her own mother or refuses to bail out her drowning siblings. They will call you cold. They will call you calculating. Let them. Because those same people judging you will not be there to pay your bills when your family bankrupts you. They will not be there to rebuild your credit or heal your psychological trauma when the people who were supposed to protect you leave you with absolutely nothing. Your safety is entirely your own responsibility. There is a profound, terrifying freedom in realizing you are completely on your own. At first, the isolation feels like a punishment. You look around and see other people enjoying their normal families, and you wonder why you had to be the one to fight a war inside your own home. But that fear quickly burns away, and what replaces it is an unshakable core of absolute steel. You realize that if you can defeat the people who created you, there is not a single thing in this world that can ever break you again. I lost the illusion of a loving family, but what I gained was infinitely more valuable. I gained absolute control over my own destiny. I no longer have to pretend to be a supporting character in Beatrice's high society delusions. I do not have to watch Lexi fake her way through a rented life. I sleep incredibly well at night, knowing my assets are protected and my future is entirely my own. The estate that was almost stolen from me will now stand as a permanent fortress for women who are fighting those exact same battles. It will be a sanctuary where they can learn to audit their own lives, cut their ties to abusers, and build their own empires from the ground up. Do not ever let anyone convince you that protecting yourself is an act of betrayal. Do not let them gaslight you into surrendering your hard-earned stability. Stand your ground. Check the math. Document absolutely everything. Let them call you a monster while you change the locks and freeze the accounts. You owe nothing to the people who view your life as a disposable resource. Build your fortress, lock the gates, and thrive.